Thank you all for coming to lecture today, and I'm really honored to be lecturing about K-pop, which is a genre and cultural phenomenon that I have been following for the past 10, 15 years. I would like to ask the same question for you. What is K-pop, and what images or people come to your mind when we hear about K-pop? Yes.
Hip-hop.
Hip-hop, great. YouTube. Anybody else? Yes? Choreography, excellent. Yes, so this is a very sophisticated crowd who know much about the kind of particular taste and flavor of K-pop. But when I teach K-pop to my undergrad students, usually what they answer concern these two images. That it is a Korean pop music, specifically emerging out of South Korea, so it's tied to the location. And of course, the second thing that many of people think of K-pop is that it is Gangnam Style. It is something that has been popularized with the rise of YouTube and the prominent role that this particular artist, Psy, played in kind of popularizing the K-pop. So while these answers are quite natural and logical, today in my lecture, I would like us to think a little beyond these typical images that we usually associate with K-pop and think about how Korean really is K-pop. And also, what is the aesthetic and performative specificities that we can associate with K-pop beyond Psy. Psy, by the way, is a very unusual case when we think of K-pop's evolution. He's somewhat of an exception to the rule. So prior to the popularity of Gangnam Style in 2012, K-pop has been normally associated with idol dance music. So today, in my lecture, I would like to address that particular more conventional aspect of K-pop, which is often tied to young performers that we often call idols. I think the easiest definition to understand idol is media personalities. They're not only singers or dancers, but they're really media personalities. And kind of go back to more conventional aspects of K-pop and what makes it so dynamic and globally popular. So as a way of answering the question, what is K-pop, I'd like to provide my own definition by thinking about what does K in K-pop really stand for. So the first aspect of K-pop that I'd like to bring is kaleidoscopic pop, in order to emphasize the multimedia performance that is so important in making K-pop's aesthetics, and also the versatility of its performers. So I use the metaphor kaleidoscope to describe K-pop. Another aspect is that it is a keyboard pop, a keypad pop. By this, I want to emphasize how digital media is so important in circulating and consuming K-pop. You mentioned that it is YouTube that comes to your mind when we think of K-pop genre. And this is where digital media and the symbiotic rise of K-pop with the rise of social media networks becomes really important. So I will get to that in a second. And I would like to also identify it as a Kidult Pop. Of course, this is a compound word made of kids and adults, meaning that K-pop's fandom is very multi-generational and diverse. It is not only idol dance music targeting young teenage fandom. Actually, people in their 30s, 40s, and much more beyond that age group can also enjoy K-pop. So with this definition, I would like to point out fandom that makes K-pop such a vibrant cultural scene. And the next definition is corporate pop. Excuse me for using K like the Kardashians, but I'm using the corporate culture that has Korean bent to it. So I would like to spell it as K, corporate pop. And when we think of K-pop artists, they're all often associated with their management companies, the corporation which produce them and promotes them. And that is quite different from some other pop artists elsewhere. So I think that's very unique to K-pop culture. And finally, of course, K-pop is a Korean pop. So going back to the original definition of why nation state and location matter. in understanding K-pop. So with that note, let's go into the history of the term itself. When did we start using the term K-pop? I think K-pop is very different from Korean pop music. Of course, Korean pop music has existed since Korean people have existed through folk music and various other types of musics that Koreans produced. However, the term K-pop specifically emerged out of certain media environment in 1995 when Hong Kong media, Channel V, had a corner called K-pop. And they would occasionally introduce popular songs that are circulating in South Korea, but not necessarily overseas, and introduce them to the audience who were viewers of Channel V. So K-pop was the term that first emerged overseas. It's very important to think about how the term is actually not coined by Koreans, but by foreigners who look at K-pop as a kind of foreign culture that is starting to circulate through the global media network. And I must also point out that the way Hong Kong media used K-pop was very similar to how J-pop was understood at the time. J-pop as a term emerged for the first time in 1988 by Japanese music industry people who wanted to emphasize young idol music as something that has potential global competitiveness in the overseas market, and pitted it against other types of Japanese pop music such as enka. So the term itself is modeled after J-pop, and by using K instead of Korea and J instead of Japan, it is starting to kind of cultivate itself as a kind of brand rather than necessarily always tied to the original location from which this music stems. The term K-pop became widely circulated in the late 2000s, as we know of it today. This is the time when many popular boy bands and girl groups such as Super Junior, BIGBANG, Wonder Girls, and Girls' Generation started to gain momentum in Asian market. That's a time when they debuted, and K-pop now becomes some kind of pan-Asian pop cultural phenomenon. So when you think about how K-pop as a term was coined and became circulated broadly across global media, it really merges with this paradigm shift in music consumption. This is a time period when the physical music sales, such as CD sales or LP sales, cassette tape sales, started to decline radically because there is freely downloadable music sites that emerged around the turn of the millennium, such as Napster, and also in the case of Korea, you have Soribada, where music files suddenly became freely downloadable. They emerged in 1999 and 2000, respectively. And with this shift came great challenge for many artists, not only K-pop artists, but musicians who worked under the old business model suddenly was faced with immense crisis. Because if your career depended on traditional means of music sales, suddenly you were faced with decline in your income. So if you look at statistics from 2001 through 2005, 2/3 of trade value in music industry declined in the case of South Korea. So suddenly musicians, artists are faced with this enormous challenge as to how to proceed in this brand new world. And ironically, this challenging circumstance was something that pushed K-pop industry to chart out foreign markets and really aggressively tried much harder to gain foreign fandom. So with this trend in music consumption came K-pop's kind of urge to appeal to foreign audience by making it into much more visualized performance rather than just a genre of music. So here we have a clip from EXO's music video, Wolf. And as you can see from the bottom, it is a very spectacular performance involving eye-catching choreography and great looks of the performers. And the scene up here is the opening scene of that music video, Wolf. And if you look at how the choreography is almost bordering on dance performance, specifically I'm thinking of dance troupes such as Pilobolus, which uses these shades of the body to express all kinds of objects. And here they're very much bordering on those traditions of dance performance art as well. So there comes my first definition of K-pop as a kaleidoscopic pop that targets multimedia platforms to reach out to global audience and try to chart out different markets outside of Korea. So if one thing that we can distinguish K-pop from J-pop, I think K-pop artists have much more urgency to kind of court foreign audience members because Japanese music market is much larger in size. So if J-pop artists are simply targeting domestic audience, they could still have good career because the music consumption is still very much vibrant in Japan, whereas for K-pop artists to just look at Korean audience, they cannot just have viable career. So with this spectacular multimedia visual performance, they are now reaching out to global audience members. Another aspect when we think of K-pop as kaleidoscopic pop is the versatility of its performers. Not only K-pop artists have to be excellent singers and dancers, they also have to be seasoned actors. And here you have a shot of Yuna, a member of Girls' Generation, who was cast in costume drama in China, and she's playing a major role in this historical drama now being broadcast by Hunan TV. So many K-pop artists branch out to acting. And they also have to be fashion icons. Here you have leader of the girl group 21, CL, posing with Jeremy Scott, who is the creative director for the fashion house of Moschino. And many K-pop artists are also becoming popular through their very distinctive fashion statements. And not only that, they have to be entertaining personalities on variety shows, such as Saturday Night Live. And here you have kind of long, here you have boy band Shinhwa, who's been enjoying longevity in their career, appearing on Saturday Night Live Korea version. Not only that, they have to be expert athletes. In South Korea, they have this sporting event specifically assembling all kinds of idol groups, and they have this annual mini Olympiad where all these idol groups compete against each other. So here you have a picture of Bora from girl group Sister showing off her archery skills. So this is all to say that K-pop artists are not only musicians per se, but they are very versatile because their career is very much dependent on their multimedia talent in various platforms of media that exists. And the second definition of K-pop as keyboard pop and keypad pop concerns how digital consumption of music really dominates consumption of live music. And I think this is not pertinent to K-pop industry per se, but it is a global phenomenon. Of course, there's thriving kind of music scene involving live, multi-city live tours. However, the way we consume music nowadays mostly involves downloading music from your cell phone or any electronic gadgets, and also consuming the visual performance on YouTube videos, right? What is kind of specific to K-pop in terms of its digital media consumption is that it is perhaps one of the cultural movements which taps into digital media in most conspicuous ways. It heavily relies on social media, and most of K-pop consumption is taking place on computers and smartphones. Although live tours overseas is now a growing trend, and boy bands such as BIGBANG is listed among top 10 artists who tour globally, and they have very much established their reputation as live touring band, but that's exception to the rule. However, the live tour overseas is a growing trend, but it has a long way to go when you compare it to other music industries. when we think of why K-pop is a keypad pop or keyboard pop, we cannot leave out YouTube. And YouTube and K-pop have long history of courtship. Does anybody remember when YouTube had its first video posted? Does anybody know what was the first video ever posted on YouTube? It is a very amateur shot by a gentleman who actually created YouTube, and it is called Me at the Zoo. It's a very mundane shot of this gentleman shooting himself at the zoo and just showing around his mundane activity. And what's specific about YouTube consumption is that anybody can post videos there, right? So it's really inundated with a lot of amateur quality videos. So when YouTube became a major platform for sharing visual materials, music videos were treated as blue chip materials for YouTube consumption, because they usually have very high production quality, especially when it comes to K-pop music videos, and you compare it to any other kind of pop music videos, you can see that the production quality is extremely high, because that's their window to the world. That's how they reach out to global audience in the beginning. So suddenly, K-pop music videos became highly valued kind of commodity in YouTube media channels. And because of its high production quality, it attracts high number of viewers, and therefore it generates high income for both content providers and YouTube itself. There is various kinds of contracts that are set between YouTube and the content providers, such as K-pop entertainment companies. But the general rule is that for every 1,000 views, the content provider gets $2 as an income. So when something like Gangnam Style suddenly hits YouTube and generates these incredible numbers of views, YouTube was quite surprised and taken aback because they had to reconfigure viewing counts, because when YouTube was conceived, they never envisioned that any single video would exceed 1 billion viewing. And now it has gone over 2 billion viewing. So artists like Psy generates lots of income just by having multiple viewings on YouTube. You can do the math, right? It's over 2 billion views, and for every 1,000 views, the content provider usually gets $2. So you can do the math. Also, this, in a way, kind of prompt K-pop entertainment groups to focus even more on music videos and create a kind of outstanding quality of kind of visual presentation, as you see in most of K-pop music videos. So K-pop, as we know of it today, places such strong emphasis on visuality of these performers. So here you have a girl group, Red Velvet, and this was a promotional shot for their single album, Dum Dum. And here they are embodying this retro femininity of 1950s. And here you have K-pop boy band BIGBANG for their 2012 live album called Alive, and there they're embodying the concepts of aliens. So there's this very strong central concept that's attached to each music production, and actually the production process starts with a very strong visual concept. Creative visual directors play a huge role in each production company. So they set up a central concept for the album, and then songwriters come in to compose music to match the concept, and then comes choreography, fashion, makeup, and so on and so forth. So this kind of emphasis on visuality is part and parcel of our YouTube culture. So going back to that courtship between YouTube and K-pop industry, I must also emphasize that thanks to this changing digital media environment, Korean music industry is linked as fourth country in the entire world in terms of digital music consumption. And if you look at the entire music market, which includes live music performance and physical album sales, Korea is listed around 10th. So you can see that South Korea is doing much better in digital music market, thanks to this particular cultural environment. And as Roald Malyankai pointed out, in 2008, South Korea became the first country to see its digital music sales exceed its physical counterpart. And if you look at the worldwide trend, only in 2014, the world market witnessed that the digital music sales finally caught up with the actual physical music sales. So South Korea is kind of pioneering the trend in digital consumption of music due to all these various factors. Now, I would like to shift gears and go to the definition of K-pop as Kidult Pop, which is to emphasize that K-pop fandom is quite multi-generational. It's not only limited to teenage groups. So you have this rising number of K-pop fans in their 30s and 40s, and in K-pop lingo, we call them emo fans, 삼촌 fans, 아줌마 fans. And directly to translate those would be aunt, uncle, and Mrs., married ladies, married women in their middle age years. So why is this happening, and what implications do these fans have in shaping K-pop's dynamic fandom? Many of you have this image of K-pop fans as screaming girls, holding this card, oppa, and I love you, so. But emo fans, 삼촌 fans, and 아줌마 fans actually exercise tremendous power because they tend to be the demographic groups who enjoy much larger disposable income, so they can actually support the career of their favorite stars. And with this trend came shifting relationship between idols and fans. So if in the past, if fans, especially teenage fans, unconditionally supported and looked up to their stars as admirers, with the rise of these kidult fans came more kind of horizontal relationship between idols and fans. Because fans in their 30s and 40s, if you're following teenage stars, you cannot just unconditionally worship them. You actually enter this relationship with an attitude that as a fan, I am grooming the career of the idols. I'm actually nurturing the career of these younger idols. So there's much more fluid kind of exchange of influences that emerged with this shifting K-pop fandom. So to break this down in terms of gender barrier, emo 아줌마 fans and Mrs. fans have enjoyed much longer history than their male counterparts. Why is that? They grew out of teenage fandom in the 1990s. The first generation of K-pop arguably emerged in the 1990s with debuting of highly influential boy band 서태지 and the Boys. And that generation still tends to kind of exert enormous influence over today's K-pop world. Right? One of the members, Yang Hyun-suk, is the head of YG Entertainment, and another performer from that generation, Park Jin-young, is also heading another entertainment company, JYP. So these stars who emerged in the 1990s still pretty much run the industry, so to say. So this explosion of fandom that came with the 1990s K-pop bands still stayed with them and kind of grew older with them. So for long-living boy bands such as Shinhwa, their fans are very much the same age with the stars in their late 30s and even 40s. So this phenomenon, in a way, is slightly different than 삼촌 fans, which I think is much newer phenomenon. And I would like to point out that 2007 perhaps was an important year for the emergence of 삼촌 fans, because that's the year when highly successful girl groups such as Girls' Generation and Wonder Girls debuted. And suddenly you have this male fandom, male fans who are not usually associated with K-pop fandom somehow emerged as social phenomena. And there are many sociological ways to explain this, but this particular generation is emerging out of this kind of post-democracy movement where pop culture consumption became a huge venue for exerting their collective identity vis-a-vis the society. There are many other ways to explain this, and I would love to entertain your questions and elaborate further on that. But if you look at this photo here. Here the banner says, because of Sistar, which is this girl group behind, 삼촌s, the uncles are experiencing puberty again, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And of course, the gentlemen who are holding the banner do not look like they're in their teenage years. These are very open vocal fans who are not afraid to really be in the public space, stating that I enjoy teen music, I follow idols, Korea, I support them. But most 삼촌 fans are actually not as visible as them. You don't see them too much at concerts. You only see a fraction of it. But they are a very influential fandom because, as I said before, they have the financial power to really groom the career of these idol fans. And 삼촌 fans are not indigenous to Korea. Look at this right picture. Here you have this kind of uncles wearing 소녀시대 SNSD T-shirt, and it even says 삼촌 fan. And this photo was taken in Paris in 2011 when SM artists had a big show in Paris Stadium. So these kind of emerging fandom really creates shifting dynamics in idols and fan relationship. And there is this kind of almost culture of sponsorship, culture of nurturing the idols rather than simply worshiping them. And it is spreading to other parts of the world outside of Korea. I mean, with the K-pop's broader circulation emerges a lot of neologisms such as 삼촌 fans, and I think it's really kind of seeping into the overseas fandom gradually. Now, to wrap up this Kidult aspect of K-pop, we must think about why this phenomenon emerges. It is not a spontaneous reaction to the idols who are debuting, but all of this is a carefully planned strategic movement from the part of K-pop entertainment companies. So going back to 소녀시대, a group which enjoys such broad popularity and has probably most visible 삼촌 fandom, if you look at their debut album, their single G album, that was the central concept and the image that was attached to the music. And if you look at their bodily performance and their kind of physical body language, they're closely following the teenage stars of the 80s. I'm sure many of you recognize who these stars are. Brooke Shields, Phoebe Cates, who was enormously popular in the 1980s. Sophie Marceau, a French actress, was also a high teen star in 1980s. So if you think about the kind of genealogy of 삼촌 fans, they were the followers of these stars in their teenage years in 1980s. So to debut 소녀시대, Girls' Generation, in an image that strikingly resembles these 1980s stars is really to kind of provoke nostalgia in male fans in their 30s and 40s and give them this vicarious experience of reliving their youth, reliving their teenage years. So it is really no surprise that we see that these gentlemen are claiming that we're living through our puberty again, thanks to these young stars. So it's this corporate kind of planning is carefully figuring into these kind of creation of fandom that kind of stretches multi-generational fandom. So that brings us to a very important definition of K-pop as corporate pop. One peculiar thing about K-pop industry is that when we think of artists, we don't necessarily call BIGBANG, or Girls' Generation. But what usually comes as a baggage is that BIGBANG, YG artists, or 소녀시대, managed by SM Entertainment. So a huge part of K-pop artists' identity is tied to who manages them, who publishes their music. And I must emphasize that K-pop entertainment companies such as YG Entertainment, SM Entertainment, JYP Entertainment, and so on and so forth, double as talent management agency as well as record label. So this is really a one-stop department store which recruits young talents, trains them through this systematic training procedure, and manages their career once they have debuted, and also publishes their music. So they really play multifunction, not quite like what we see in the Western counterparts. So, for example, when we think of boy band One Direction, we don't necessarily identify them as boy band managed by Modesty Management, or boy band who's published by Columbia Records, right? I mean, we just identify them as One Direction. But that's not quite the case with the K-pop artists. Much of their kind of performance identity is deeply tied to what the management company lays out as their career path. So this corporate influence on cultivating this public persona of K-pop idols becomes incredibly important. However, we cannot end the discussion of K-pop as simply being corporate pop. It is deeply down part and parcel of South Korean pop cultural movement. And with the rise of enormous popularity of K-pop around the globe, South Korean government is starting to, or already has started to, tap into its visibility across the globe. So here you have a picture of the current president, Park Geun-hye. And this photo was taken during her first state visit to mainland China, PRC, in 2013. And there, in her publicity photos, she was shown with many of these widely known K-pop artists, such as Super Junior and Girls' Generation. And she was also attending their performance as shaping the image of the South Korean nation that's deeply tied to K-pop industry. So this relationship is a very complex one. It has not always been mutual, I must say, because South Korean officials deep down would like to promote their national image that is much more solid and stable than something like K-pop. Right? K-pop is too transient. You never know when its popularity will end. However, K-pop seems to be something that is really winning hearts of many global audience. So right now, they are courting K-pop as a foundational source to enhance nations' soft power. It's not Park Geun-hye who started this trend, but in 2009, then South Korean President Lee Myung-bak established Presidential Council on National Branding and looked into pop culture as a way to enhance South Korea's national image vis-a-vis the world. And 2 years later, in 2011, he announced agenda for enhancing global competitiveness of South Korean pop culture, part of which included K-pop as a central kind of focus to enhance South Korea's national image. And that trend has been going on since mid-90s, really tapping into the power of pop culture to reshape South Korea's image to be much more positive and therefore serve as a foundational source of enhancing nations' soft power. This kind of tricky and ambiguous relationship between corporation, as we see in corporate pop, and the nation state, as we see in Korean pop, is a very complex one. I don't believe that many K-pop entertainment companies are entirely happy to carry the national flag, especially when they want to chart out foreign markets. Because when these artists enter foreign markets, especially Northern American or European markets, they want to be understood as part of broader pop culture, dance music kind of scene, rather than being kind of quarantined as the ethnic pop music artists. So this relationship is a very complex one, and I believe it will shift as we see the rise and fall of K-pop's popularity. So in order to illustrate how South Korea takes K-pop artists seriously, I wanted to compare the cover image of Korean Tourism Organization brochure. These are the cover images directly taken out from this organization, which is, of course, the subsidiary of the Ministry of Culture, Tourism, and Sports in South Korea. So if you look at the cover image of 2007, designed to attract foreign tourists to South Korea, you have this image of this beautiful traditional Korean garment, right? That's the image of old, beautiful Korea that South Korean government officials probably want to hang on to. However, something like this appeals much better to younger tourists and tourists of many different generations. So if you look at the cover of their brochure in 2014, you have no other than K-pop boy band BIGBANG, who is enormously popular, and they're asking you to visit Jeju Island. So South Korean government has made this shift to focus on K-pop artists to really groom nation's image to the foreign audience. But we have to think about how Korean really is K-pop, if we were to stick onto this definition of K-pop as Korean pop. And I'd like to show you some instances where I can really challenge that definition, that K-pop is perhaps not entirely Korean after all. I know that some of you really like this boy band, GOT7, managed by JYP Entertainment. See, I'm applying that corporate understanding of K-pop artists' career. And of course, there are 7 members, GOT7. There are 7 members. Nearly half of them are not ethnically Korean. Bam Bam is a Thai citizen. Mark hails from Southern California, so he's an American citizen. And Jackson is Hong Kong Chinese. Of course, they all kind of ethnically pass as Koreans. However, if you look at the makeup of the talents, nearly half of them are not Korean citizens. So how Korean is this band? Another example, CL, who is the leader of the girl group 21, is trying to break into US market, and her activities, engagements are all managed by this gentleman whose name is Scooter Brown, and he's a well-known manager whose clients include Justin Bieber and Psy. So everything that CL does will be very much the vision of this gentleman, Scooter Brown. And here you have another shot of Girls' Generation member Tiffany posing with the famous producer Ted Riley. By the way, Ted Riley produced the single called The Boys when Girls' Generation was trying to entertain the idea of breaking into US market in 2011. Ted Riley's vision had a huge impact in producing the single The Boys. Not only is he a songwriter, but he produced the entire vision of the album. And of course, he was courted by SM Entertainment because he's a well-known figure in music industry who produced for Michael Jackson, Bobby Brown, and the like. So the image and the vision of the album was the work of Ted Riley. And here you have one of the members of YG boy band, BIGBANG, Taehyung, posing with a dance crew who hail from all parts of the world. This is a shot from his music video for the song called Ringa Linga, and it's a dance version music video. And the performance was spectacularly choreographed by a person whose name is Paris Goebel, and she hails from New Zealand, of all places. And the spectacular choreography is her work, and this dance crew who work with Taehyung hail from all parts of the world. So how Korean is really K-pop? That's a question that we should kind of ponder upon. To have a much more closer look at how K-pop is made nowadays when compared to, say, 2011, we see this entanglement of multinational, multicultural sources coming together to produce K-pop in a way that distinguishing national origin of talents would be meaningless. So in 2011, South Korean pop culture critic Shin Hyun-jun stated that K-pop is produced by Korean money, so the investment comes from South Korea, and the talents, the producers, choreographers, the idols themselves hail from Korea, Europe, and United States. By the way, many songwriters hail from Scandinavia and other parts of Europe, such as England and Germany, especially for SM Entertainment songs. And you also have figures like Ted Riley from US being a huge part of their production. So it's made by Korean money, by these multinational talents, and it's mostly consumed by Asians. In 2011, I would say that that was a very fair assessment of how K-pop is made. But today, Does that still hold truth? I don't think so, because so much has changed, and this entanglement of multiple talents, investments, and consumption patterns coming together has made it almost indistinguishable to lay out such clear patterns. So if you look at who's making K-pop, who's providing funding for it, Japan is a huge part of it nowadays. AVEX, which is a Japanese production company, is one of the main shareholders of SM Entertainment, which is the largest South Korean K-pop production company. And also you have capitals flowing in from Europe to produce K-pop music. And if you look at the talents that go into making K-pop, now Japan has become a significant player as well. So you have new idols who are hailing from Japan, such as Momo and Sana for the girl group Twice, who debuted last year, as well as other talents such as Yuka, who is now a new member of the latest SM boy band NCT, and Takuya, who has been kind of active in K-pop scene with his debut with the band CrossGen. So Japan is becoming an increasing player in K-pop talent scene. And in terms of consumption, it is truly reaching out to the territories that have not been part of K-pop world, such as Kazakhstan, and those consumption beyond Asia seems to be a growing trend. So how Korean is K-pop? It is a very difficult question to answer, and my response to that it is that the merging, the convergence of talents, finance is a trend that is irreversible to the point that pointing out the national origins of these sources would be meaningless. And we see this trend in film industry and in other types of media productions. So to wrap up, I think that K-pop is not just Korean pop. It is kaleidoscopic pop, meaning that it is a multimedia performance, emphasizing the versatility of performers. It is a keyboard and keypad pop, meaning that the digital consumption is so much more important factor than the live consumption of it, especially in terms of globalizing K-pop. And if you look at fandom, kidults, including multi-generational fandom as part of this consumption pattern, and corporate pop, where production companies' vision tends to play so much more huge role than their counterparts elsewhere. And finally, Korean nation state still wants to hold on to it as a huge source of enhancing its soft power. So I hope that I have complicated and opened up new dimensions of K-pop as not just being defined as K-pop. With that note, I would like to thank you very much.